In this video, we're going to be making a fictional train station in Houston, but not just any station. We're going to be making a station that you can explore in using the camera. This station will have 3 layers: an underground tram stop, an underground 24-track station, and an above-ground mezzanine that'll connect people to the street level. When I finish the station, I'm going to save it as a scrapbook so that other people can use it as they see fit. The first thing I'm going to do is dig a hole in the ground for the tram stop, which is going to be located underneath the train station. This is slightly guesswork. I'm guessing how much space I'm going to need for both levels of track and the mezzanine. I'm going to need a lot of space because all of the trains that are going to be using this station are going to be electric, so everything is going to have to fit over the catenary lines, which is usually really hard to do when making an underground station. Negative 20 meters might be enough, but again, this is mostly guesswork. Now I need some grid lines so I can tell what I'm doing. Honestly, I don't understand why this isn't the default texture anymore. I kind of wish it still was because it makes things a lot easier. With the grids, I can tell exactly where I'm laying the track, and then I can always paint it after the fact. Now that I have the grid painted out, all I need is a track for the trams to run on. I'm currently looking for one right now. I like to use tram tracks that already have a catenary line over them so that I don't have to worry about adding that myself. Of course, it creates the unwanted side effect where you're limited to the trams that can fit under that specific catenary, because different trams have different catenary heights, unfortunately. Interestingly, if you attach 2 tracks that are facing opposite directions, it'll just change it to the direction of the initial track. I'm actually working on a fictional tram, and it's going to be designed to be compatible with the NF10 infrastructure. So basically, it's going to be compatible with these types of tracks. As soon as I finish experimenting with the cab, I'm going to release it to the download station and then start work on the middle sections. It's going to be available in several colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, black, and silver. I'm making it with a changeable destination sign. I found the track that I want to use, so all that's left to do is place it in the direction I want to go. The tram tracks are going to go west to east, and the train station is going to be placed on top of it. The tracks for the high-speed train are going to go from north to south. Now all I need is a platform for the tram station. This might take a while because there are a lot of platforms in this game, and the specific platform I use depends on what I want the platform to do at that moment. Okay, I've made my decision of what type of platform I want to use. I'm going to settle for this one. However, it's a bit too tall for a tram platform because trams are a lot lower than that. So what I'm going to have to do is lower the platform. First, I'm going to lay the platform in the correct direction. In order to know how long a platform I'm going to need, though, I'm going to have to first place the train on the track. There are 3 trams that I know of that are compatible with this infrastructure. One of them is the LF1, the other one is the GT6, and the other one is the NF10. You can't use the LF1 because, unfortunately, it's not compatible with this version of the game. It was an add-on that came with the classic Cavern City route, but that route is not available on the train store anymore because it is no longer compatible with this game. It's only compatible with Trainz 2009 and Trainz 2012, which I don't have on this computer. Now, the reason why I didn't choose the GT6 is because, in my opinion, it's a bit too short. I like long trams with multiple sections. I don't know why, but I've never liked really short trams with like 1 or 2 sections. First, I'm going to move the platform closer to the tracks, and then I'm going to move it to its final location using more detailed tools. I always make the platform slightly longer than the train because different trains stop at different locations on the platform when I use the track mark method. Some trains stop a little bit ahead of the track mark and others stop a little bit short of the track mark and others stop exactly at the track mark. So making the station slightly longer than the train means that when the train stops at the platform, no matter which way it decides to stop, it's still going to end up in the station somewhere. In case you're wondering why I use track marks to stop the train and not just a invisible station, which is an option that exists in this game, the main reason is because ever since Trainz 2004, I've always had issues where the driver would just slowly go through the station without stopping and never open the doors and never load the passengers, and it was really frustrating, so I decided to just go with the track mark method because so far the trains usually know to stop at a track mark. Now I'm using this new move tool in order to drag the platform down to the correct height. Well, basically a generic height. I'm gonna drag it down to the correct height later on. Another issue with using invisible stations is that the trains do not stop realistically. This game has the trains programmed so that when you stop them at the station, they slow down to around 2 miles per hour when they get to the station, and then slowly travel all the way to the other end of the platform. Then it stops when it gets to the end of the platform. There isn't a single passenger train on this planet that approaches the station like that. Real train drivers use a visual aid in order to know when to apply the brakes so that the train hits zero by the time it gets to the end of the platform. For example, I was once riding a New Jersey Transit train on the Raritan Valley line, and I was watching the driver as he was driving the train. At first, the train was cruising along at around 30 miles per hour, but then the driver, because I'm guessing his visual aid required the train to be traveling at 80 miles per hour, he accelerated the train up to 80 miles per hour. Then he turned the throttle off and pushed the brake lever all the way up. The train slowed down very sharply until it got to the end of the platform, where it then stopped. I always try to emulate that as best I can when programming these stations, but the closest I can get to that is having the train stop at a track mark, because that is the only way to get the train to approach the station at a higher speed and then stop when it gets to the end of the platform, rather than cruising along very slowly through the entire platform. Anyway, what you just saw was me trying to remember how to rotate a train using this new Surveyor tool, because I could not remember what I did last time. Okay, I found out what I did wrong. When moving an entire train consist, you have to hold the shift key and select each car one by one. Otherwise, it's only going to move the one that you selected, which can take a really long time if you're trying to move a 50-car train. So, in this aspect, at least, the older Surveyor might be better. It would solve the problem if there was an option to select the entire train. Anyway, to rotate the consist, you click on that train symbol and click rotate consist, and it rotates the entire train if it's completely selected. Now I'm moving the other platform closer to the track. One thing that wastes a lot of time when I make stuff for this game is being too awe-inspired with what I've made so far and then just staring at it instead of continuing to work on it. This happens every time I make a lighthouse for this game. I end up wasting time looking at it from different camera angles in Blender and being like, oh, this is going to look so amazing when it's finished. It's going to have all these details, all these textures, and when the sunlight hits it at just the right angle, it's going to look like this, and this is what it's going to look at night, this is what the animation is going to look like. And then after I'm finished looking at it from all these camera angles, I realized I just wasted an entire hour that I could have spent making the lighthouse. I've had to throw away a lot of footage that was just me looking at the station from random camera angles, and I didn't even finish it yet. Here's one feature I really like about this new Surveyor. Now, if you want to move the platform, you can just click anywhere in the platform and drag the whole thing closer to the track. You don't have to move each individual end of the platform. This will save me a lot of time. It's getting a bit cramped over here, so now I'm going to dig a bigger trench to make room for the station. I try to only dig what is absolutely necessary because it's a lot harder to lay roads and buildings above the tracks when the ground is like this. Now I notice a slight problem with the station. It looks like if someone gets lazy and decides to walk across the tracks rather than using the walkways I'm going to build later, they might get their foot stuck in the gaps in between the girders that support the tracks. You might be thinking, but they're not even supposed to cross here, so why would you make it easier for them? Well, I was watching a video talking about badly designed railroad crossings. Basically railroad crossings where the tracks cross the road very close to where a traffic light is located. Like this one in Allentown, and to a lesser extent, this one as well. The narrator said something that caught my attention. He said, if it's stupid, but it works, it's still stupid, you just got lucky. With that in mind, I'm designing this train station so that even if a passenger does something stupid, at the very least, I've done everything on my end to lessen their risk of injury as much as possible. I was also contemplating whether or not I should put a fence in between the tracks, but that might be a double-edged sword because a passenger might be trying to run from one track to the other to get their train at the last minute because they didn't realize they were on the wrong platform. And that fence will just be an obstacle that'll make it take longer for them to get out of the train's path. For that reason, I'm not a big fan of placing fences in between the tracks. Now I'm going to use this concrete slab to make it look like there is a tunnel beyond the station. Now, in my previous version of the station, I forgot to make sure the concrete slab was above the catenary and it was still sticking out a little bit. So this time I'm double checking just to make sure. Yep, the catenary is underneath the concrete slab. It's now time to make the first platform for the high-speed train. The tram stop is actually going to be sandwiched between track 1 and track 2 in this station, similarly to how the PATH train at Newark Penn Station is sandwiched between track 1 and track 2. A ramp will connect track 1 to the tram station and another one will connect the tram station to track 2. There's also going to be a pedestrian bridge that connects all the tracks together, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. This grid I'm adding is so that I can tell where to draw the tracks for this station. In case you're wondering why I choose to lay the tracks in a specific direction, this map, which is one of many maps I made of the system, shows that all the trains that enter Houston travel north to south. Then they split into their various directions outside of the city. Since the tracks for the high-speed train are located above the tunnel for the tram line, I need to finish laying out this tunnel first before I continue laying the tracks down. This tunnel is like a guide that tells me this is where the tracks are allowed to go. The tracks can't be any lower than this or it'll be too close to the tram tracks. Now it's time to choose a track that I can use for the American bullet train. I usually try to only use tracks that have animated junctions now that that's a feature, though I usually only do that if it's a conventional train or a high-speed train. I don't care as much about subway tracks and tram tracks for some reason. Now, since this is a high-speed line, I always look for concrete tracks for the train. However, there's actually an inside joke where sometimes I will have wooden tracks, and the joke is that that particular state did not provide a lot of funding for high-speed rail, so the railroad was forced to settle for less and use wood ties instead of concrete ties until they could find the proper funding. I'll also have bumpier sections of track as well, and the joke there is that the track quality is bad because the state didn't provide enough funding to order proper tracks for the high-speed train. There's actually a lot of jokes like that on my Outer Banks bullet train route that's on the download station. Now, this is a really nice looking track, but it doesn't look like it has animated junctions, so I can't use it. Well, let's try this one. Here's another very nice looking concrete track. This one has animated junctions, so it looks like we found our track. Okay, now I'm going to lay down the tracks for track 1. On all of my American bullet train lines, the eastmost track is track 1. On tracks that are transfer stations between the American bullet train and other railroads, tracks for the American bullet train are labeled 1 and up. Tracks for different railroads are labeled A1, A2, and up. The letter changes with each railroad. Oh, that's not good. We have a bit of a problem with the track we selected. It collides with the rest of the scenery. That's one problem with building multi-level stations. You gotta be really careful with the tracks you select. Now, because of this issue, I can't use this track. I need to use one that doesn't have that feature. That feature is useful in other situations, like when you're transitioning from a track to a bridge, but it's not useful in this specific situation. So now we gotta find a track that has concrete ties, animated junctions, and doesn't have a ton of gravel underneath it. Anyway, getting back to track numbers, the tracks at the Amtrak station are going to be labeled A1 and A2, and the tracks for the tram station are going to be labeled B1 and B2. That way you can differentiate one section of the station from the other. Okay, that track does have animated junctions, so it looks like we can go with that one. But first, I need to do a quick test to make sure it doesn't have a bunch of gravel underneath it. Okay, it looks like we found our track. This track does not have a lot of gravel underneath it, so we won't have to worry about the trams colliding with it when they go into the tunnel. Now I'm going to lower this track so that it sits on top of the roof of the tram tunnel. One thing I like about this version of Surveyor is that you can click on and move splines from pretty much any direction. For example, this direction would not be allowed in the older version of Surveyor because for some reason the ground has to be visible from every single direction before you can click on a spline. If the sky is visible at all, it won't work. Now I'm checking to make sure the track isn't visible through the tunnel. It's a little bit too low though, so I'm gonna lift it a little bit higher than that. You could also do it like that though, because that's how the tracks are like at Newark Penn Station. They appear to be rails embedded into the slab of concrete rather than actual track ties. Now I gotta dig a trench to make way for this side of the station. You could also just use the smoothing tool to smooth the ground around the tracks, but I'm going to need more space for the platform anyway, so I'm going to use this method instead. This takes a little bit of trial and error because I need to figure out exactly how high the tracks are. Okay, negative 11 meters is a bit too high. I need a lower number. How about negative 12? Okay, that looks about right, but still a little bit too low. So a slightly higher number than that. Let's see. Let's try negative 11.9 or something. That looks about right, so I'm gonna go with negative 11.9. Now it's time to add the platform for track 1. I can't use the same platform that I used for the tram station because it's not wide enough. When making intercity stations, I like to use really wide platforms so that the passengers have plenty of space to move around. Before I can put a platform down, I must first put the train down so I can know where the platform should be. We're going to be using a train I just released for this game called the Brightline bullet train. I also have another American bullet train as well, but I'm currently working on an update to that train, and I'm a little bit embarrassed with how it looks now, knowing what I could have done to make it better. I'm currently working on a texture and mesh update that'll kind of make it look like the Amtrak Avalia Liberty logo, and another one that'll make it look like the Amtrak IRO logo. We're going to be using the blue Brightline logo because of all the American bullet trains I've made so far. This one's my favorite one. If you download my American bullet train route on the download station, you'll see that some of the stations have passengers standing on the platforms, and the amount of passengers I put there is actually heavily calculated. I took the average population of that town, then I divided it by 30%, and then I added 100 for like tourism and stuff. Then I took the number and divided it into the total amount of platforms the station had. Going by those measurements, each platform in this Houston station is going to have to hold, let's see, 2,745 people? I'm not sure if that's even possible. So yeah, this station is going to be extremely crowded all the time. So when I start putting the passengers on the platform, however many can't fit on the platform are going to have to be in the waiting area and in the mezzanine. Okay, after going through several platforms, I decided to use this Japanese platform. I like these platforms because they have yellow lines, just like American platforms, which is really hard to find in this game. A lot of platforms have white lines instead, which is not common in the United States. The floors on the American bullet train are a little bit higher than what is considered standard, so even though this is a high level platform, I'm still going to have to raise it further so that it's high enough for the train. When I make train station platforms, I try to make the gap between the train and the platform as small as possible because I really don't want anyone falling in between that gap. For that reason, I usually choose to make straight platforms rather than curved ones because it's a lot easier on straight platforms to have the platform as close to the train as possible. The doors for these trains run on tracks that protrude slightly from the width of the train, so I actually have to make sure the platform is far enough back that it won't collide with those door tracks. When I first made the door animations for the American bullet trains, I had the doors retracting into the wall like how they do in a lot of commuter trains. However, shortly after, I noticed that a lot of doors on real high-speed trains open outwards for some reason. I don't know, probably because it looks cool, but every single high-speed train I looked at had doors like that. After seeing those videos, I figured, well, I guess if that's the norm for high-speed trains, I better do that for my trains as well. So I reanimated the doors so that they open outwards on the Brightline train, but they still open towards the inside of the walls on the original train because I haven't finished updating that one yet. Now I'm adding the catenary. The catenary line is 22.5 feet above the track. That way, freight trains can also fit under it. I couldn't find the catenary that was the correct height, so I had to make some myself. As you can see, I know practically nothing about catenary besides the basics that it is a wire that supplies electricity for the electric trains. Now I'm going to click on Apply Height to Spline Endpoint. This option makes the spline solid so that it doesn't rise and fall with the land, which is really important here because the spline has to go over the tram tracks. All of my catenary have a bracket underneath them so that they can be attached to railroad bridges because I kept running into the issue where when spanning a railroad bridge, the catenary would be hovering above the bridge off to the side, and I would have to create something to support the catenary poles. This was very time consuming, so I decided to make my catenary so that it can easily be bound to a railroad bridge. Unfortunately, it's backfiring here because it penetrates through the ceiling of the tram tunnel. There is a solution for this though, because I also made an unsupported section of wire. To add it, I'm going to add a spline point to either side of the tunnel, but this train is in the way, so I got to remove it first. Okay, I'm going to add a spline point here. Actually, I might not have to add the unsupported section because there's enough distance between the wires that it doesn't penetrate through the ceiling. So all I need is one of these on either side. I was going to show you the option where you can take a selection of a spline section and then have the game replace that section of spline with a different spline, but it looks like I'm not going to need to because it doesn't penetrate through the ceiling anymore. Now I'm going to show you how I make the stations explorable. First, what I need is an invisible track. I usually use the BNSF 50 invisible track because it's a lot easier to figure out how high the track has to be. It just has to be high enough that it's slightly visible above the platform. Now I'm going to lift the invisible track up to platform height. It looks like I made a mistake with this platform and there's a slight slope to it, so I'm going to have to adjust it a bit. I discovered this thing on a download station a short while ago called a drone, and basically it runs on invisible track. So I'm going to see if I can use that in order to explore the station. The drone apparently appears below the invisible track, so I'm actually going to need to make the track higher for this purpose. What I normally use for this method is a drivable human being called a male business person. I think there's a female variant of this as well. The problem with these guys is that they cannot climb upstairs because apparently they are horribly out of shape. I tried to make it climb an escalator once and it just kept getting stuck halfway up. I haven't tested the drone out yet, so I'm going to lay down another section of track and lift it up so that we can see what the drone looks like. Okay, unfortunately, it's a bit bigger and further to the left than I was expecting it to be. At this size, it probably won't even fit inside a lot of the smaller areas of the train station, so I'm still going to be using the drivable person instead. The drivable person has an interior, and when you go inside this interior, you can turn the camera around and look from various directions. And if you turn the camera around 180 degrees, you'll see the low poly mesh of a person's face. The horn is very strange.
Hello computer, hello computer, hello computer, hello.
And that's the bell. You know what would be really funny if the horn was the sound of a human trying to imitate the sound of a train horn, and the bell was the sound of a human trying to imitate a train bell. I find it funny that it actually has train brake noises. It makes you wonder what happens when you move this thing. Like, why would a person make hissing noises whenever they move? Anyway, it looks like the drone does not have a horn or a bell. Interestingly, it apparently has bogey sounds even though it's supposed to fly. I actually remember really hating this tram because the rear power car is not powered, so the front power car would always have to drag it around, which slowed it down. I noticed it kept slipping on sharp curves, so I stopped using the rear power car altogether and replaced it with the front power car. This tram still uses the original passengers from Trainz 2004, and that's because back then there wasn't a way to have passengers in the cab, so to fix this, there are attachment points in the cab where the person attached passenger models for this game. The passengers they use are the same passengers as Trainz 2004, and it looks like the creator did not change the passengers despite updating the train. But interestingly, when you exit the train, it has the current passengers. I've never been a fan of this tram because I always thought it was too quiet. Like, you can barely hear it accelerating. This tram tunnel needs walls, which we're going to add later. It looks like you can only ride inside the first car in this train. You can't go inside the rear unit or any of the middle units. Well, that's all I have for this video. In the next video, we're going to be connecting track 1 and track 2 to the tram station and adding walls to the tram station and tunnel.